The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 7. Part 6. The next morning they crossed the White River and bade it farewell to the east of Olbiana. After 2 days they saw the towers of Tripula on the horizon. Arian was glad, he was close to his goal. Kush was ahead of the group. Here is Tripula, the city of magic, where everything can happen, both good and bad. I'll give you a piece of advice, try to stay out of the wizard's affairs. Well, we're going to deal with a magician business. Gosberg pointed out very sharply. Kush cast an unfriendly glance at the Denka. The city was surrounded by a wall, but they were more for ornamental reasons, since it lacked a defensive function, and it was noticeable in that it lacked watchtowers and battlements, but it was a robust construction. Arian found a city very different from the previous ones he had visited. Tripula had been the capital of magic in Shanaris for centuries. It had the status of a city-state, although it did not care much about the politics of the neighboring kingdoms. An example in the Iron Wars, it was neutral, despite the requests of Olbiana or the League of Dorsal Del Dragon for the Mags members of each kingdom to help in the war, but the Council of Mags was neutral, forbidding any Mags from Tripula to intervene in the war. Tripula within the kingdom of Olbiana maintained a great independence. It had no governor from the Jewel of the South, although it maintained a small garrison, but they were only there to keep up appearances. The city was governed by the Council of Magicians, which was composed of the Grand Master of each order of magic, and from among all of them they chose who would preside over the Grand Council, which was usually a position for life. The Great Council, apart from governing the city, was the one that regulated and controlled all the mags of the world, at least in theory. Kush, for example, was not subject to any orders from Tripula and yet went to register at the council headquarters because he respected its authority. Tripula was a place where there were libraries, registries, shops, markets that contained books, papyri, crystals, ingredients, minerals, spices to prepare spells and potions to perfect their art. It must be said that all these activities of the city had to pay a tribute to the Council of Mags, and part of these benefits were given annually to Olbiana in exchange for maintaining that certain independence. Arian stared at the city closely, the walls barely able to contain the towers that rose to the sky, plunging large areas of the city into gloom throughout the day. In their path were hundreds of figures wearing robes of all kinds and colors, much like the one Kush wore. Many walked hooded and in silence to go unnoticed, others jovial laughed in groups and performed the occasional funny magic trick. These were the apprentice magicians who returned from their homes to the magic academies to continue their studies. Kush smiled at the sight of the young apprentices. It reminds you of other times. Yes, but it's been a long time and a long way off. Beyond the oceans of glass. Arian watched the wizard in silence as they advanced. Each member of the company was different from the others. They all kept their story to themselves, but none of them seemed to be mercenaries by choice, except for Gosberg. Kush walked away from the young woman looking sad. For the first time Arian felt guilty for having reminded him of something unfortunate. Don't blame yourself, Arian. Arian turned. It was Aris who was speaking to him. Bye. It is hard to have to leave your kingdom and have your family dishonored for eternity. How sad, I didn't know. We are all more or less here because of a misfortune that forced us to abandon our old life. The banishment of the Emperor? Yes, it's a much more complicated issue. The Emperor betrayed the Black Empire to accede to the throne, causing the death of my father and my comrades in arms. I am sorry. Nothing can be done to it at the moment. Orcs too? They fulfill a promise made by their father and mine, to protect my life until death. The dwarf. Kritos, when his kingdom was invaded by the Stufos, the dwarfs of the Brown Hills began an exodus. They could not bear to live with the dwarfs of the Dragon's Ridge. Some sought accommodation within the Dark Empire. Others went north and west as blacksmiths and stonemasons, since in those arts they are always well valued. Fewer offer their services as mercenaries, as in the case of Kritos. He has not overcome defeat. he refuses to grow a beard and long hair like the rest of the dwarfs until he reconquers the Brown Hills. And will that happen? It's easiest for Gosberg to drink only water for a week. The young woman stared at the orcs, and the half-orc, who had given up riding days ago, talked quietly as Krytus cleaned his repeating crossbow without paying attention to what was going on around him. Vanus was the one who drove the wagon now. The Kindeli was very used to traveling this way with her parents and drove much better than the dwarf, since she was very adept at dodging all the potholes and potholes. So you are all here because you have lost what you loved most. The half-orc looked at Arian with some bitterness. Yes, all but one. The couple's eyes fell on the small Denka who was engaged in a conversation with a merchant with whom they shared a fate, while the huge Denka walked closing the procession, lowering his head at the comments that arose about his large size. Where does Gosberg come from? No one really knows. Who is he? I don't know, I just know that I was already part of the company long before I joined it. And the other one? It's huge. Sabu had to move carefully, dodging people. An unintentional stomp, and it could be a drama, even though everyone was moving away. He is his adopted son's Vladimir Sabu. He is only 10 years old. Arian stopped riding. He couldn't believe it, that huge Denka was the age of a child. Aris gave a sarcastic look at the young woman who was not used to a world where she was barely over 10 years old and an adult. For the half-orc, if it was normal for an orc at the age of 10 to pass initiation, at 15 he was a full-fledged warrior and at 18 a corpse of the multiple battles in which the orc tribes were immersed before their entry into the Black Empire. They wandered through the interior of Tripula. The magic business was very thriving, and it didn't just attract magicians. It attracted merchants and adventurers of all kinds who would sell the items found in their adventures to any wizard who offered a good price for them. It was about to get dark, so they stayed at the first inn they found. The next day Arian and Vanus would be separated from the rest of the group. The mercenaries had a meeting. They rented a room for themselves, and the mercenaries stayed in 3 adjoining rooms on the 2nd floor of the inn, dined there and then went to sleep. It was nice to rest in a bed again after almost 2 weeks of travel.
Bye.